fighting bears, Amazons, kamikaze pigeons, doping from the beginning of the last century, Michelangelo's pranks. There are many interesting moments in the history of mankind that are unknown to the general public. And in this video we will tell you about several little-known fun historical facts that will surprise you, and perhaps even shock you. Around 71 BC, Roman legions under the command of the consul Lucius Lucullus besieged the Pontic city of Themiscyra. Yes, the same one in which, according to legend, beautiful Amazon warriors lived. The legionnaires, having examined the city and its defenders from afar, did not find any muscular beauties, were expectedly upset and decided to raze Themiscyra to the ground. However, the assault did not yield anything. The walls of the city were strong and high, the defenders fought bravely, and the army made a temporary retreat. The siege began. The Romans were skilled masters of trench warfare. They had engineering troops who specialized in mining. By order of Lucullus, sappers dug a tunnel under the walls of Themiscyra so that the soldiers could penetrate the walls. But the Pontians noticed the tunnel and, when the legionnaires began to advance, they made holes in the ceiling of the tunnel and threw several bears into it. Yes, you heard right. Naturally, the Romans were not at all happy with them. The battle of the Romans with war animals was described by the ancient author Appian. But he did not mention whether the bears was the standard weapon of the Pontians or whether they were hastily recruited from the nearest menagerie. One way or another, the bears coped with their task. You cannot immediately pierce the skin of a large animal with a gladius or pilum. And as if the fighting bears weren't enough, the inhabitants of the besieged city also threw several beehives into the Roman passages. Well, to add fun and excitement. As a result, the attack failed. After reinforcements came to the besiegers, defeating the army of King Mithridates VI near the city of Cabira, Themiscyra fell and was destroyed. Submarines, which began to be used en masse during the First World War, completely changed the rules of naval battles. And the most dangerous and technically advanced ships of this type at that time were German submarines. At the beginning of the war, Germany had only 28 such submarines. But despite this, they demonstrated extremely high efficiency in the fight against the British fleet. The submarines attacked suddenly, sank ships, and virtually nothing could be done about them. In 1916, the first weapon against them was invented, depth charges. But there were still 2 decades left before the creation of sonars. Therefore, German submarines were invisible even to the most advanced military ships of the time. They did what they wanted, attacking even neutral and merchant ships without warning. The British, losing ships one after another, decided that they had enough of this and began to look for ways to fight. Fortunately, without sonar, the submarines were practically blind in battle. All they could do was use their periscopes to detect a ship floating carelessly nearby, and then fire torpedoes in its direction. Therefore, the German boat could be detected by observation tubes sticking out from under the water. And the British took advantage of this. Teams of British sailors patrolled their waters in small boats. When they spotted a periscope, they swam up unnoticed, threw a canvas bag over it and smashed the eyepieces with blacksmith hammers. The Germans, resounding the serene depths of the sea with furious abuse, returned to their port for repairs, almost by touch. There is information that, for example, the captain of the destroyer HMS Exmouth specifically recruited blacksmiths to the crew because they were better at swinging hammers than the average sailor. True, this tactic also had drawbacks. The periscope is difficult to notice, especially if there are even the slightest waves on the sea. Therefore, the British were constantly looking for a way to make enemy submarines more visible. For example, the Royal Admiralty hired a sea lion trainer named Joseph Woodward to teach his pets to look for submarines and call out their location. However, the program was ineffective, and British Admiral Frederick Samuel Inglefield proposed a new idea. On his instructions, a training complex was built, where ornithologists purposefully trained seagulls to detect and unmask underwater vessels. Seabirds were fed over mock-up submarines, developing in them the association, submarine means food. It was assumed that flocks of hungry seagulls would fly over the submarines, giving away their location. In addition, bird feces would stain the periscope lenses, impairing the Germans' visibility. The training of the birds continued for almost a year, but later the project was discontinued as unnecessary. It turned out that it was more effective to escort merchant ships with destroyers with deep-sea bombs than to hope that a stupid seagull would detect the submarine and begin to accurately bombard its eyepieces with droppings. Since 1917, no merchant ship left port without an escort, and attacks by German submarines became much more rare. In addition, British and American reconnaissance aircraft began to patrol the seas. Although they could not destroy submarines, only one submarine was sunk by air attack during the entire war. In their presence, they were forced to keep their periscopes out of the water, remaining blind and helpless. Everyone knows the phrase that the French Queen Marie Antoinette allegedly said when she was informed about the starving commoners.
If they don't have bread, let them eat cake.
She didn't actually say that, but her last words are recorded accurately. Marie Antoinette was executed by guillotine on October 16, 1793 at exactly 12:15. When she climbed the scaffold, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot and said,
"Forgive me, Monseigneur. I didn't do it on purpose."
That's what it means to be raised as a true lady. In the States, they love eccentric military projects no less than in Britain. There, too, they were constantly thinking about how to involve various animals and birds in the war. Indeed, why are all these tailed and feathered creatures wandering around idly? Who gave them a deferment from the army? In the 40s of the last century, the United States created many new models of bombs and missiles, but they all had depressingly low accuracy. The warriors were looking for a way to make the projectiles controllable, but nothing worked. Electronics had not yet reached the required level. Behavioral psychologist Burrs Skinner came to the aid of the valiant American Army. He suggested that the military use living creatures rather than bulky electronic devices as an onboard missile control system. According to Skinner's idea, the projectile should be aimed at the target by a specially trained tactical war pigeon. After all, these birds carried military correspondence, so why shouldn't they also deliver bombs to the address? The military thought the idea was a little stupid, but intriguing. Skinner was given a budget and engineers. The contractor was General Mills, Inc., a food, toy, and bomb manufacturer. Together, the following design was developed. A special camera with 3 round screens was installed in front of the projectile, where an image was projected using a system of lenses and mirrors. A dove sat in front of them. When he noticed the silhouette of a target on the screen, he had to peck at it. The mechanism recorded the pressure and directed the ammunition in the desired direction. Skinner trained the pigeons using a method he called operant conditioning. If the trained bird pecked precisely at the image in the simulator, it was rewarded with grain. If it was lazy, it was deprived of the reward. The Dove project was developed from 1940 to 1944. But in the end it was folded, although Skinner threatened that he was about to turn his birds into professional kamikazes. However, in 1948 the program was resumed under the new code name ORCON, from the English Organic Control, Organic Control. But all research was discontinued in 1953, this time for good. By that time, compact electronic control systems had been developed, and pigeons were no longer needed. On August 30, 1904, in the city of St. Louis, USA, an athletics competition took place, which was simply poorly organized. Therefore, the events that happened at the marathon resemble a bad joke. 32 athletes took part in the 40-kilometer marathon, but only 14 reached the finish line. The race took place on a very bad road. It was not blocked for cars, and cars passing by raised columns of dust. Because of it, several athletes were on the verge of death, suffering internal bleeding and lung damage. Others fainted due to the 32 degrees Celsius heat and dehydration. American runner Frederick Lortz was the first to reach the finish line. As it turned out, he became ill during the race and was picked up by a coach in a car. Lors was driven almost to the finish line, but he, having recovered, got out of the car and decided to take a walk. And suddenly he crossed the finish line. They immediately began to honor the athlete and presented him with a medal, but he admitted that there was a mistake. And he was kicked out, booed and suspended from competition for 6 months. The second place came from Briton Thomas Hicks. This one had already run relatively fairly, at least most of the way, so it was considered the real winner. Although Hicks, as was common among runners in those days, was on doping. Several trainers ran with him, who poured cognac and rat poison into his mouth along the way. At that time it was believed that strychnine had a tonic effect and was generally incredibly useful. By the time Hicks reached the finish line, he was hallucinating and could barely move, poisoned by alcohol and strychnine. The trainers literally carried him, holding him by the shoulders, and the athlete, unconscious, moved his legs in the air, thinking that he was still running. He was immediately taken away in an ambulance and barely pumped out. Also among the finishers was a simple Cuban postman named Felix Carvajal, who joined the marathon at the last second. He raised funds for his participation in the marathon by participating in races for money throughout Cuba. But on the way to the Olympics, Carvajal lost all his cash at dice in New Orleans and was forced to hitchhike to St. Louis. Felix didn't even have any money left for equipment, and he ran in ordinary clothes, a shirt, shoes and trousers. The latter were shortened by a passing Olympian, a discus thrower, with a pocket knife. And finally, 2 black students from Africa, Len Tanyane and Ian Mashiani, took part in the marathon. The Africans joined the race because they were passing by and noticed the athletes preparing. And they decided, why are we worse? Ian came 12th, but Len could well have taken the prize, but 2 factors prevented him. First, he ran barefoot because he didn't have shoes with him. The second, halfway along the way an aggressive stray dog followed him, and he was forced to seriously deviate from the route. Michelangelo Buonarroti was a very famous artist and sculptor who received recognition during his lifetime. He was so cool that the Pope personally invited him to paint the Sistine Chapel. The painter enthusiastically took up his favorite task, painting beautiful naked bodies in the strangest positions. And the pontiff liked it. But among those close to the Pope there were also those who believed that naked people in the Vatican were no longer acceptable. The shameless man could at least draw underpants for them, but he, you see, doesn't want to. No decency or humility before the Lord. The main opponent of nudity in the chapel was the papal master of ceremonies Biagio da Cesena, not the last person in the circle of His Holiness. Having seen Michelangelo working on the Last Judgment fresco, he stated the following.
How shameful that in such a sacred place all these naked figures should be depicted, so shamefully exposing themselves. This fresco is more suitable for public baths and taverns than for a papal chapel.
Michelangelo, in response, added Biagio to the fresco. He depicted him in the underworld, surrounded by demons and frightened sinners, in the guise of Minos, an infernal judge with donkey ears. Biagio's body was entwined with a snake, sinking its teeth into his penis. Biagio was furious and complained about the artist. To which the pontiff laconically replied that he is God's vicegerent on earth, and his power does not extend to hell, so the portrait must remain. Later, at the Council of Trident, the churchmen reconsidered their views on nudity in art and decided, no, after all, it's not good to appear in church without pants. By order of the new Pope Pius IV, the artist Daniele da Volterra, a student of Michelangelo, made some changes to the fresco, adding loincloths to everyone. Because of this, he received the nickname Bragatone, drawing pants. In addition, he remade Saint Catherine and Blaise of Sebastian depicted there. Mischievous Michelangelo painted the Catherine completely naked, and Blaise, looking at her butt. The clergy decided that the lady should be dressed, and the saint should be turned towards the heavenly throne. And to portray on his face not carnal interest, but exclusively piety. On February 10, 1840, Queen Victoria of England married Prince Albert of Saxe-Coburg-Gotha. The happy newlyweds were served a luxurious wedding cake weighing 300 pounds, or approximately 136 kilograms. This luxurious three-tiered cake was crowned with a miniature bride and groom in Roman dresses and several smaller figures representing their entourage. The figurines were made from refined sugar, an incredibly expensive thing in those days. The cupcake was soaked in copious amounts of booze and loaded with lemon, elderflower, sugar and dried fruit. But there was a catch. The bride was on a diet, the guests were not hungry. In general, no one had the desire to eat a cake weighing more than 100 weight. After the ceremony, Victoria ordered it to be cut into pieces, sealed in tin boxes and distributed to acquaintances, friends and just random individuals. But not all of the owners of a piece of such cake were ready to use it for its intended purpose. The slices were left as souvenirs, and it so happened that some of them have survived to this day. To this day, pieces of Victoria's wedding cake are of great value to antiquities lovers. So, a couple of these slices are kept as a relic in the Royal Trust art collection. Another small piece was bought at auction in 2016 for £1,500, $2,000.